Hey, welcome to the Content Advantage, a talk show about content for content professionals. I'll be your host today and moderator of the show, The Content Advantage, with our guest today, Michael Smith. Michael, how are you today?
Hey, Scott. I'm doing pretty good, thanks. How are you?
Excellent. Great. Thanks for joining us. Let me tell the audience a few things about today's show and the housekeeping that we need to do here. Hey, in case you're wondering, we can't see or hear you. We don't have access to your camera, or your microphone. Excuse me. Or your microphone. So you don't have to worry about that. Also, you can ask a question at any time by clicking the Ask a Question button located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Doing so will open a little text-based window into which you can text a question to us. I'll ask Michael as many questions as possible with the time remaining. Keep in mind, it's not a two-way communication channel, so I won't be texting you anything back, but you can text in a question at any time during the show. Also, there's additional content available in the attachments section of your webinar viewing panel. That button is located just directly below where you're watching the show. You click on that, it opens a document repository where you can find troubleshooting information about the BrightTalk platform that you're using to watch today's show on, as well as contact information for our guest and information about our sponsor, Zoom In Software. So definitely make sure to check out the attachments section during the show. Also, you're going to be asked to answer a couple of polls during the show. We'll prompt you for those, and also your graphic user interface will indicate that there's a poll available, and it will ask you to just read a simple statement and pick from a multiple choice answer. You click to participate. It's super easy, and we hope that you'll participate when those polls are made available. Also, at the end of the show, I'll ask you to rate and provide feedback on the quality of the conversation that we had today and the topic. You can also provide any kinds of short feedback to the presenter that you'd like. And I know Michael would love to hear feedback from you. So definitely at the end of the show, I encourage you to do that. All right, without further ado, we're going to jump back into the show here. Michael, thanks for joining us today. I know that there has been a lot of shows that we've done that are topic based, where we've already have a guest that's actually done a particular thing, and then we kind of talk about what they've done and share the lessons learned and best practices. Today's show is a little different. We're kind of going to discuss an idea and see if there's some merit to it. So could you tell us a little bit about yourself and your connection to the topic of today's show, which we've called context, content, and product sales?
Absolutely. And thanks, first off, Scott, for the opportunity to address your great audience with this idea. So briefly, about 20 years ago, I started in the automotive trade as a mechanic, quickly kind of evolved into creating content, creating courses, whether it was for technical trades or actually working as an instructor. I later ended up in university doing a bachelor's of commerce, and then moved back into technical publications at an original equipment manufacturer that makes snowmobiles and jet skis in my home province of Quebec in Canada. I kind of evolved through there and discovered that there was a lot of sort of inefficiencies, I guess you could say, in creating technical content, especially when it came to 3D. Notably, a lot of effort was spent taking 3D content and turning it into images. And that kind of always sort of bugged me. So when I had the chance in 2019 to spin out and I guess collaborate in launching a new company that specializes in 3D, we kind of carried a lot of that baggage with us and saying, can we improve efficiency in technical communication by leveraging 3D? And that kind of led us on to asking this question of how do you actually measure efficiency? Because we realized it's not a simple question to answer. So I think that's the kind of premise that brought Scott and I together to talk about the whole topic of today's conversation of what content do you produce, what context are you in when you communicate it, and ultimately what metrics, qualitative or not, do you use to measure whether your content is delivering on its intended purpose.
Can you talk to the audience briefly about what you mean by inefficiencies in 3D and what 3D are you talking about?
Okay, great. I hope I don't go off on the deep end on this.
That's okay. You're allowed to.
I've made it a little bit of a project of mine over the past few years. When I talk about 3D, so most products these days are designed in 3D before they're actually manufactured. So it could be anything from an entire vehicle to a cell phone case. Most of the time, there's a 3D designer, mechanical engineer, or not graphic designer, but 3D modeler that creates it, gives it properties, manufacturing tolerances, instructions, and all of that, but in 3D. Then usually when it comes to product documentation, some people take the manufactured product, take pictures of it, and use that for, I guess you could say, illustrations and documentation, where most companies, I would say, they're able to leverage the engineering 3D models, will try to reuse that 3D model to save a lot of time. So you can start documenting before the product is actually built. Usually it's faster to make edits to your documentation if the final product deviates from maybe one of the early prototypes. And I think on a large scale, that's the 3D documentation process that we're looking to address. And so when a company uses the 3D assets from engineering and takes them, these are high quality assets, and just produces pictures and publishes those pictures, we often ask, what type of effort goes into exploding views, moving parts around, creating information bubbles, to ultimately publish something that may be of less value to the end user. And that's really where we want to kind of dial in on the sort of inefficiencies that we're trying to address with this project that I'm here to kind of talk to you about today.
What do you think the biggest challenges are that are preventing people from using 3D in a way that would be efficient and avoid the kind of let's take some screenshots of our beautiful 3D image and shove them into our documentation?
I think it's about disjointed applications. So I remember when I was getting involved in technical training at Bombardier Recreational Products, I had a service ticket in 2015 to Adobe, because we were using Adobe Captivate at the time, to support 3D content. And so if I go to your question, the type of inefficiencies or the decrease, I guess you could say, of value to the customer or to the end user is that they're kind of stuck with the idea that the author had in mind when they created the original content. They can't move it around. They can't explore it. They can't take the parts apart and kind of learn, right? As most hands-on people are. And I'll admit, my bias is one of a mechanic, right? It's a mechanical background where everybody I know likes to learn by taking things apart, spinning it around, trying to put it back together. And I feel that by removing the 3D from the end deliverable, we're depriving or removing that ability from people who are more interactive learners.
Are you trying to say that you think original equipment manufacturers are responsible for teaching people?
I think it's part of their responsibility, absolutely. When we talk about after sales, there's one quote that maybe we can launch the second polling question now, from an HBR article that says that what it actually says is that after sales services is more complicated than delivering or manufacturing products. And so I think that it's part of the OEM's responsibility is training, yes, but it also has to do on many different other aspects of just proper product documentation, has to do with training, has to do with warranty. It has many, many, many different facets. But I would definitely say, yes, that training is part of it.
What do you think OEMs could be doing with this content after somebody purchases it? That's not just the regular typical function of documentation. In other words, it's there because it's an evil necessity. We have to produce it in case somebody needs something. What value do you think these OEMs are missing? What opportunities might there be to leverage this content in a post-sale world to make revenue or do other things? I think we included product sales in the title. So how are we getting connected to product sales?
Well, I think that's when it comes back to what a user or a frustrated user might Google or type in Google and search for, right? So if they have a lawnmower, for example, that doesn't start, but it could be an iPhone that doesn't turn on, they'll type in, lawnmower doesn't start. And who's better positioned to provide help articles or troubleshooting guides than the original equipment manufacturer? And so if that's the gateway to the manufacturer's website, if the gateway to the manufacturer's website is by providing the industry's best answer to that question of why does my X brand lawnmower not start, well, then that's a great funnel to product sales or support or locating local help. So I think that the opportunity that a lot of manufacturers are missing is that they keep a lot of their high quality technical content behind closed doors, only maybe making it accessible to their partner network, sometimes maybe even charging for access to this content, and ultimately not tying it into any sort of revenue generating activities like spare part sales. One of the ideas that kind of stem from this is...
I'm sorry. I just started to jump in there. I was going to say that spare parts sale thing is really interesting to me because I've seen some applications of this, but I don't know that our audience knows exactly where you're going with this. So tell us the scenario that you think they're missing and using spare parts sales for some kind of an example.
Right. And it kind of comes back to when you read a blog article, sometimes you see a disclaimer at the top that the author puts in saying that they may or may not make a commission from any parts ordered through a link that goes to Amazon. What I'm getting at is that if the original equipment manufacturer provides the best answer to a question that somebody types into Google, and they also sell spare parts through their after sales network, well, shouldn't they be tracking the results of the user's interaction with that support content back to ultimately, and hopefully for the manufacturer, a sale of a spare part? So ultimately, a way to measure the amount of revenue generated from spare part sales that are purchased to solve a customer problem that the customer ended up on the OEM's original equipment manufacturer's website to solve. I hope that didn't get too discombobulated there, but
yeah, I think it's pretty good. But can you give like an example of how somebody might encounter a piece of content, and I guess you're assuming that it's coming from technical documentation as its original source, and how do they end up buying a part?
Okay, so if we go back to the example of the lawnmower that doesn't start, maybe the person types my X brand lawnmower doesn't start, and then would end up on the manufacturer's website for troubleshooting, for example, a no start condition on a lawnmower. Assuming he or she goes through some flow chart, it would probably end up with a part to replace, so a diagnosis and a recommendation, whether it's just maintenance or a specific part to replace. We would then expect the person to click on that part or that recommendation that comes out of a troubleshooting guideline and order that part. So Scott, does that answer the question, or am I still missing the maybe the underlying purpose?
I think it does, but I think it seems to me to be more complicated than perhaps the way that you're describing it. It would seem to me that the content creators would have to be aware that their intent is also to convert people to buy parts, and that they would have to write micro content to support the idea that you could buy something. So you go to a knowledge center, right, for a brand that makes some products. You say, how do I clean my vacuum cleaner filter? And the Dyson website, for example, and you learn how to clean it, and then you realize that you put it back in, it still doesn't work. And then you read further and learn that there's a certain lifetime for this filter. And yes, you can clean it and wash it, but you've washed and cleaned it too many times. and now it's time to buy a new one. usually there's no more content there. There's usually no connection to sales, right? In the Dyson example, there is, because I'm a Dyson customer. I just went through this filter cleaning thing, and I recognize that I've cleaned the filter a couple of times, and I've kind of worn the filter out. And there was a button that said like something like, learn how you can subscribe to receive filters every 6 months, right? So you don't have to do this again, basically. And I clicked on the button and it told me about their sales program for their filters. I can imagine a printer company having a deal with a toner company, having a deal with a paper company, and then you go and you visit the HP website to complain, try to find some solutions to a problem that you have with your HP printer. And while you're there, you learn that there's a subscription service for toner, right? And so now the troubleshooting problem became a lead for a sale, and then eventually close the sale deal on a part that's related to the thing that you were there to kind of see about. Is that where you're getting at? Like the curiosity lands you on the page where you are, and now we want to try to prompt them to not only be satisfied with the answer, but to take another step that generates revenue.
That's absolutely right. And I think that, I remember back when I started technical writing, how many references we had to non-existing content. And for any tech writer out here, they probably know what I'm talking about. And so making that connection, not only does it generate profits, or that would it have presumably the intention or the consequence of generating profits for the company, but it would also make sure that if somebody is writing a troubleshooting guideline that ends with a result, that result is actually achievable. Imagine if in your Dyson example, if it was no good news, replace the vacuum cleaner. In your case, whoever was writing the article knew that there was a replaceable filter and was able to point you in the right direction. And I think that that's what I'm talking about by making sure that the end result is pointing towards a serviceable component. You would never want to advise the customer or the reader to replace a part that actually isn't available. That really doesn't help anybody.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say the other thing that happened was I was logged into the site. So they were able to, in their knowledge center, to know that I was a customer, which meant that they also knew which unit I owned, how long I'd owned it, whether it was under warranty or not. And depending upon, and I have 2 Dyson products. So when I clicked on both of them to see kind of what would it tell me. And one of them told me, like, I purchased it 2.5 years ago, warranty expired. Okay, so now it doesn't matter what I read later, because it might say, oh, you've got a warranty, you can have a free filter. Oh, I can't, because my warranty is expired, right? But what they didn't do was take it the next step. They should never show me content that offers me to get something under warranty if my product isn't under warranty. So they missed the connection between, he doesn't have a warranty, he shouldn't really see warranty content. Now, if you wanted to sell warranties, this might be different, because then you could say you're not under warranty, but you could be. Look here, give us some more money and we'll extend your warranty. So I think that's what you're getting at, is that there's some mechanics that we need to go through in order to connect traditionally after sale content that was just meant to solve problems to actually making it a revenue generator. What brought this to your mind? What made you have the aha that products could maybe be sold this way, or spare parts?
Well, it's primarily a question about value, right? Nobody buys a car with the idea that it's not going to start one day. They would be kidding themselves if the car didn't start, if they said that my car is always going to start. But they're buying it on the value proposition that when they go out to start it, it will start every single time. That's why it's such a frustration when you go to use a product. Usually the more expensive the product, the more frustrated you are when it doesn't work.
Yeah, of course.
But you're absolutely buying that value proposition of uptime. And it could be for a printer, it could be for a medical device, it could be for a car, a lawnmower, even the webcam that we're using today, right? If I thought there was a 50% chance that the webcam wouldn't work, I probably wouldn't have bought it. And so when you're thinking about the value that a customer gets by buying your product is measured in uptime, Well, what you really want to do is you want to provide the best solution as quickly as possible to anybody that's experiencing any kind of problem. So if the customer wants peace of mind and your solution is an extended warranty, well, that's one thing. If the customer wants responsiveness, right, and I have a problem where maybe it's the lawnmower that doesn't start for the sake of being repetitive, but you can get a part back, within a week, which is probably the next time they need to cut their grass. You're probably measuring that response time appropriately in that case. And I think that really it's a multifaceted question and answer combination, but ultimately it has to deliver on the promise that the person was sold on when they bought the product. And I think maybe if you'll let me, I'm watching the poll change for question 2, which was, do you agree that after sales service is more complex than manufacturing products? So far, the spread is 50-50 on the first 2 answers. So yes, 100%. And sometimes it depends on the product.
Yes. Yes is the answer. Yes, we do. Our audience does believe that delivering after sales services is more complex than manufacturing the products themselves. I'm sure the product manufacturing people are like, hey, wait a minute. Hello, our job is hard too.
Well, in the actual HBR article, I don't know if we'll be able to link to it after the show today, but they provide a bunch of comparisons between why they make this statement, right? On the one time, lead time is constant. You put in a batch order for your supplier, you kind of agree on terms. 6 months ahead of time what part you need to purchase to meet your production forecast. Whereas on the service side, think about batteries, right? On a really, really cold day, you sell 100,000 batteries. The next day, you don't sell any. And it's that service component side that everything is variable. You need multiple sites to meet your service promises to your customers, whether it's shipping time, responsiveness, just plain old inventory levels. Nothing is kind of constant. And I think that I would hope that in the time since this article was published, it is a 2006 article, a lot of things have changed. But just looking by the response, it seems that it's still quite a challenge.
Let me jump over and ask you a different question. So in order to make this approach work, it seems like companies who attempt it would need a delivery platform to serve up the right piece of content at the right moment of need, right? Just like my Dyson example, they need to serve up something that's appropriate for me and the product that I actually own and the version and the model of that product, right? Not just any old version, but the one that I own, in order to give me the right content I need right when I need it. Can you think of anything else they might need in order to help scale this approach and adapt it as business needs change?
So maybe I can just specify one thing. Are you talking about from a manufacturer's perspective or from an end user's perspective when you talk about scale? Are we talking about, or maybe both?
I'm talking about being able to do it at scale,
right.
Being able to do it automatically to as many people as possible and change it like that instead of going back to the let's photocopy stuff and do everything the old school way.
Well, I think when we first started looking at it, and again, this is in the context of, say, a feasibility study or just trying to understand what issues are, where the metrics are. When we look at a traditional, say, spare part documentation platform with the good old-fashioned exploded views, call outs, axes saying that this part was exploded in this direction, anywhere from 30 to 50% of the costs of creating the end deliverable, which is the spare parts platform, is spent creating these exploded views and maintaining them. The problem with that is that everything needs to be done ahead of time. And then when a part changes, it's very hard to scale because a specific part, I mean, if you're a good manufacturer, it's probably standardized and goes on hundreds of models when everything is said and done. If a small change happens in there, you then have to update, hundreds of different spare part catalogs. The innovation that's been kind of put forward by a lot of companies is then to build a database in the back. So each sort of 2D view and material list or bill of materials that relates to the callouts or the parts that you can order on screen is built from a database. But it still doesn't solve the problem of what happens if the part changes location on the vehicle, what happens if it physically looks different, what happens if you say have a running change, which means that during a production cycle a part was swapped out with a new part. So I think in order to achieve any kind of efficiencies at scale, is you need a system that's able to track all of those changes and update them seamlessly across your entire product portfolio, which I think if I look back at my previous job, that's millions of parts. So you need to be able to update visuals in real time, as well as all of the part information, and adjust that for fitment. So what part goes on what vehicle? What does it look like on a specific day or point in time? And so I haven't come across a solution yet, a one solution, I should say, that can incorporate all of that.
And that begs the question of whether one solution is the practical thing or not, which on many of the shows that we've had, the answer is no. Most consultants start off that answer with that depends, but it depends. And then when you say millions, and then, let's just throw in something else, 29 languages, now you need something that's bigger and scale, and it's going to cost you. And it's going to be painful maybe to even make the change, right? To kind of get everybody on board and to move everybody in the right direction. But this is a good time for me to probably tell you a little bit about the sponsor of today's shows for our audience members, just to let you know that there is a platform that is available that help you bring together both structured and unstructured information. It's called Zoom In. Zoom In software transforms technical product content into a dynamic and intuitive experience so that your customers can find the answers they need whenever they need to use your product or service. Zoom is a cloud-based solution which allows you to streamline content operations and gain powerful analytics, which are really the most important thing you can gain from this, so that you could refine your content strategy and improve customer self-service every single time you notice that there's something that you could do a little bit better. You can point your web browser to zoominsoftware.com to learn a little bit more. There's also some information in the attachments tab located below your webinar viewing panel. Clicking the tab will open a document repository where you can request a private demonstration of Zoom In software, and you can access some additional content about the platform, including several white papers and a case study. All right, so with that under our belt here, let me jump into our next question here. I was kind of wondering, if you were to think about what you think the solution should be, and I think you're trying to figure that problem out. Are you personally trying to develop a solution? Are you just thinking through the process? What's your intent, and where do you hope to land with this idea?
Well, maybe before I answer that, I'd like to just go back, maybe add something to what you said right before the break. You mentioned that adding 28 languages and scaling a solution like this to be quite expensive, and I would just like to maybe answer the question, but expensive compared to what? Because that kind of comes back to the context of the original question that we're trying to ask here: is what is the kind of KPI? What is the metric that judges whether it's expensive or not? And I'd like to say that when we've been asking this question, oftentimes technical publications is considered a cost center. So anything is too expensive. You have pizza for the team, and that's kind of too expensive, right? And that's kind of something that I took with me, a chip off my shoulder when I left, or when I stopped being a technical writer. But that very same company that I used to work for, they sold 700. This is public figures, so I'm not making anything I shouldn't be. It's in their annual filings. But they sold $780 million worth of parts, accessories, and apparel in 2020, I think. And so if I say, compared to what, if you could make a small dent, so by scaling your process, if you've always got the right part, and if you're funneling traffic to your spare parts, which is honestly probably after sales only profit center. Some manufacturers, I believe, charge for training. But if we put that aside, spare parts is after sales primary profit center. And so if you can move the needle even just a little bit on a $780 million a year business, granted, this isn't maybe for the smaller manufacturer, but I do think that whatever investment that might take to streamline these operations and to align around kind of a set of metrics that guides content creators towards generating revenue and defining what success is for an article, it probably could pale in comparison. But again, that's something that's up for discussion, and it's not.
Yeah, and I guess it assumes that we're going to bring these departments together. I think is probably the biggest challenge, because if sales is focused on revenue generation and customer support and documentation is kind of focused on customer service, customer satisfaction, then you have to marry customer service and satisfaction with sales. We've been making an argument for a long time now that sales and technical documentation and marketing are all related, and that the quality of your content and technical documentation impacts how people feel about your brand, whether they're going to be loyal to you in the future because they feel like you care enough to provide answers for them when they have common challenges. Do you feel like that organization that you worked for before, was it already a parts organization, or did the parts organization, the salespeople, and the TechCom people have to have a coming together moment in order to figure out how to do this in a streamlined way that would work for everybody?
I'd say that sales and after sales were definitely separate. I'd say after sales and marketing had more of a mingling than sales and after sales. However, they did fall under the same jurisdiction if you move higher up in the org chart. But I definitely think that they were treated very separately. Unfortunately, too, because one of the last things that I worked on, and something that I've kind of passed around to other tech writers and tried to get their opinion on,
right,
is something that we started doing where training was writing the concepts. So in a data framework, you've got concept, you've got a topic with a concept, tasks, maybe, and specifications. And we noticed that training was often rewriting the general explanation of how something might work.
Yes, like as they do.
Yeah, and they were often doing it late.
Right.
And so they were missing all
the, right, and they're doing it differently because they are training and they're not TechCom.
That's it. And so because they were late, they weren't getting engineering approval. Oftentimes they were missing translation deadlines. So the training wasn't ready in all of the languages when TechPops was. So something that we tried to do to remedy was to get training to write the general system concepts. So that way it had to go through engineering approval. It was gated as part of the new product development process, and training didn't have to rewrite it. As a benefit, training was ready. Training was ready when the product launched in multiple languages with approved content. And I think in the end, the tech writers who were responsible for troubleshooting tasks and publishing the specifications gained a better knowledge of how the equipment actually worked, which they were often lacking. So I think in the end, that was a nice sort of synergy.
Can you talk to us a little bit about, we're going to take some questions from the audience. If you're an audience member and you'd like to ask a question of Michael, you can click the Ask a Question button located underneath your webinar viewing panel. That'll open up a little text-based window into which you can text a question. The first one is, Michael, can you conjure up an image of what you think this looks like in a company? Can you just give us an example and then explain like how that might work?
The idea that we've been circulating so far that we'd like feedback on is a web-based platform that integrates information from the PLM, so the product lifecycle management software, which is typically where a lot of these 3D assets would reside. That's where engineers will design them and kind of store them. The ERP, so the enterprise resource planning software, which might be SAP, for example, and that really takes care of, say, part numbers, what parts may be serviceable, who can buy them, at what price, manages the lead time, etc. But trying to see if we can kind of put this into, one platform that's cloud-based. So an author, for example, that would want to use 3D models to augment their documentation wouldn't have to learn engineering software, check them out of a PLM software, and basically just have streamlined access to what after sales needs. Oftentimes, we've also noticed that after sales needs vary greatly than production or engineering and manufacturing needs. So it gives them that kind of flexibility to use the source data, but also overwrite them at scale. Well, I say overwrite, I probably shouldn't say that, but add those additional translations or part descriptions that you might need to support the audience. And so the idea that we're really circulating is, would it make sense to have a web-based platform that could pull information in from engineering and enterprise resource planning and incorporate most of the functions, or if not all of the functions, that after sales needs, from content production to 3D visual support, and be able to link the two with quantifiable objectives. This content led to so many part sales of this part. And really see kind of, if that's the question, sort of take it from there. Does it make sense? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are definitely, I can tell just from questions from the audience, that there are definitely some applications that might be practical. I think it's a challenge, right? Because the reasons that you mentioned earlier, telecom is often thought of as an after necessary evil expense. Everything is expense, expense, expense. I think you'd have to really have a strong business case for this aftermarket sales. So, for example, I'm privy to some information about an MRI company, company that makes MRI machines that hospitals use to give imaging to customers. People, need brain scans and things of that nature, and that there's not a big profit margin on the machines themselves. Instead, there's profit on service. But servicing an MRI machine means sending somebody to a hospital. And a hospital is not like other businesses where you can just pull up out front, park your car, and be lucky and get the first parking space and walk right inside and then just get what you want. You usually have to find your way there. You may have to park far away. You may have to then walk to a building. Then you have to go to an information desk. And then they have to tell you where you can and you can't go in the hospital and how you get there. Then there's some wayfinding, like maybe you have to follow some color on the wall or some footsteps on the floor to find your way to wherever you are. You may or may not find your way there on the first attempt. Eventually, you end up wherever it is the MRI machine is. If the MRI machine is broken, you're going to have to find the MRI machine technician and their management. Then you're going to have to go find the MRI machine. You're going to have to look at the MRI machine. You're going to have to see if you can diagnose what's wrong with it. You're going to then have to go back to the client and tell them that you need to go back to your truck in order to assess whether you have the tools and the parts to make the necessary repair, which means you have to walk all the way back to your truck again. Long story short, it's labor intensive. It takes a couple hours on every visit. So if you could do 4 visits a day normally without any improvements, but you could do 5 visits a day if you optimized and started using your content to, like, let's say, service up a 3D image of the MRI machine on an iPad, and the sales representative or the service representative could go in and say, this is the piece that's broken, and they could touch it and it would pop open. They could learn more about it, like what tools will I need? What will I need from the van? Then they could actually query to see if the van's inventory actually has those parts in it or not. They don't have to go back to the truck to figure that out. They could actually even conjure up an invoice or a estimated cost for the customer and get their approval on the iPad at that very moment. That would allow them to cut down a lot of back and forth. Then they go to the truck. Let's assume they can do the repair. They grab the things they need. They go back. They make the repair. They've earned revenue for the company. Turns out that then the truck could, if you keep this kind of idea going, the truck communicate back to the inventory at the warehouse that says, this driver just sold these parts to this person to fix this machine. You'll need to reorder those in order to stock the truck when it comes back, so that the truck now has those parts again tomorrow. And those kinds of things like that, that kind of automation of all that is super exciting for this manufacturer, because adding just one more visit a day would, kind of give them 20% more revenue coming in. Are these the kinds of solutions you're thinking about, or am I off a little bit on that?
No, that's absolutely right. In that HBR article that, again, I'll quote one more time, maybe I won't quote it, but it'll be a paraphrasing, is that even though spare parts sales or service might represent a smaller percentage of revenue for manufacturers, ultimately, when they look at the profitability of that service, kind of like what you're getting at, it can be. And the companies who execute well on this strategy actually generate more profit from the after sales service, whether it's supporting with extended warranties, whether it's just plain old, selling replacement parts and providing the service that goes along with it. This does kind of draw my attention to one of the first questions that we asked in the poll, which was, what industry are you in? Looking at it, I think 50% of today's attendees are in the software industry. So I hope that some of these sort of analogies and these physical labor tasks associated with replacing spare parts, aren't lost on you. Only 12% are from manufacturing. So hopefully that this question problem scenario does resonate with those that are in the manufacturing sector.
I can help with that. From a software point of view, one of the number one problems that software companies have is that people not using features that are part of the tool, and then later complaining that their software doesn't do this, that, or the other, because they really never learned all these things. Maybe there was too many features, right, to do a good job. And for the companies that need to update, they need you to physically agree to update the software to allow them to download new files to your machine. If you don't do that, then you open up a host of problems for them: cybersecurity issues, privacy, challenges with the outdated technology. So I bet software manufacturers could actually have an upgrade path. So maybe it's not, it's the equivalent of money, right? So you're saying, if you have this problem, you can read about it here, and here's how you can fix it. But if you click the button here, we'll update you to the new version of the software, and you're guaranteed not to have this problem, because this problem is related to the old version that you continue to use without updating. If you would simply click the update button, which would convert them to the new product. Now they're in the new product. They're not in the old product anymore, which helps, because you need to offload those customers without making them hate you. You want them to stay with you and keep paying you, but you want them to pay you for the new stuff. Maybe there's a way to kind of make an equivalency here, where it's not an exchange of cash necessarily, but it's an exchange of attention, or moving to the platform that the vendor wants you to move to. Maybe there's a similar business goal. It just doesn't involve making that a revenue generation service as much as it does moving people all onto the new platform, so that the company can focus all of their investment in the new platform, instead of trying to support older versions, older platforms for customers that refuse to upgrade.
That's a great point, because now that you mention it, it does jog my memory that there was a major software OEM company in the US. And when I say OEM, I mean like software publisher. And I'm not talking about manufacturing anymore. And they, in their annual report, they actually mentioned that upselling their current customers from a perpetual license to one of these, well, now famous SaaS licenses, was actually much more profitable and a better return on their marketing dollars than trying to go out and acquire new customers. They had, I can't remember the number. It was a huge, kind of dormant potential of just people who weren't upgrading. And so absolutely, if you solve problems that people are querying in, looking for help in your knowledge base, your knowledge center, and these are problems that are solved in subsequent versions, absolutely, the documentation could lead to an upsell. It could lead to customers who haven't been a customer for 5 years becoming a customer again.
And I could actually see them learning about the functionality of the new software version that you've upgraded them to, because it's tied to a problem they currently have that they want to get rid of. So they're motivated to get rid of the problem. And if your solution is, you could go through all these steps and test it out, and maybe it'll work. If not, call support, versus click here and you're guaranteed not to have this problem, because we don't even do that in the new version of the software. I think it would be attractive to some segment of the audience.
But this is also that comes back down to the KPIs that we're using to measure, I guess you could say, productivity, or just measure technical publications in general. Because when we create a marketing campaign, we have we know what buttons users are clicking on. We know how they got access to that button. We know where they came from. We have all of this background information. And I know that when I worked as a tech writer, we didn't go into that kind of in-depth tracking in our content. Maybe today things have changed, and I'm in fact hoping that they are. But if they haven't, this is exactly what we're proposing in saying, if there was a technical doc for the software and a user upgraded after reading that doc, I mean, credit should be given to whoever wrote that content, because they correctly identified the problem that the user was having. They pointed them towards a solution that obviously the customer considered this solution for the price point to be,
and they converted.
valuable.
Yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
It's just a different kind of conversion, right? It's still a marketing tactic. It's about convincing somebody to do something for a reason that's beneficial to them and to the company. Before we tackle the rest of the audience questions, and if you've got a question, please type it in now by clicking the Ask a Question tab located underneath your webinar viewing panel. Can you tackle polling question number 3? So audience members, if you haven't taken the poll yet, you have to come out of full screen mode in order to see the polling interface. But the question is your organization looking for solutions to create after sales content with 3D digital twins this year? Talk to the audience about why did you ask them that, and what are you after there? And what's a digital twin?
So a digital twin is essentially just a 3D representation, so a virtual representation of some kind of physical good, right? Where if it's an automobile in real life parked in your driveway or on the street, it's a full automobile that's designed virtually. iPhone is the same thing, so on and so forth. So a digital twin is just a virtual representation. And if they're looking to create after sales content with digital twins, basically that's saying, well, are you going to be using these engineering assets for purposes other than just plain old, manufacturing? When an engineer is looking at whether a wire should go through a specific, routing on a vehicle, they need that sort of model. They need that 3D model to be able to say, is there enough clearance? Is there anything in the way? But when you reuse that for technical publications, instead of waiting for the vehicle to be built and then taking a picture showing the diagram or showing where that wire went, if you can leverage the 3D model, currently the way that people are doing it to take a picture, that's one thing. But actually, I guess the intention of this question was, would the company actually publish that 3D model then for after sales content? So it could be for the standard topics, part nomenclature, right? When you get documentation on anything, right? Whether it's a lawnmower, an iPhone, they show you where the power button is, where the different features and mechanisms are. And it'd be really interesting to know that, what companies are really interested in using 3D and actually even delivering that 3D user experience to their audience.
And it looks like the majority of our audience says, no, that's not on their radar. And that probably wouldn't be strange, given the fact that more than half of them came from software. Because basically, what's the purpose there? How about taking a look? We're going to look at some of the questions that come in from the audience. One of the things I wanted to ask you was, there's a question in here that asks about tech docs have historically been included with the product. And this particular person is basically asking, do you see a situation where you could sell technical documentation? I was going to say, I can see some applications for what you're suggesting. For example, what if we had really high quality information about how to repair cars, and we packaged that up and we sold it to the dealership so that they could push that content to each individual workstation where a mechanic is waiting for another car to come in, and they use the power of the documentation, as you've talked about, the 3D images to zoom right in on the problem. And if you packaged it up in a way that helped them be more productive, to help them get more work done, kind of like the MRI sales example earlier, I could see how that you could actually charge for that, and a dealership might pay for that because in the end they're going to make more money. But the question from the viewer is, how can we challenge the precedent that tech docs have historically always been included with the product, i.e., you can't charge for something you've always included as a part of the cost of the product? Do you see charging for tech docs as a separate line item, something that might be possible outside the example I just gave?
I do, but I wouldn't push for it.
You wouldn't say that's not the model that you're after.
No, well, I mean, it's a model. Personally, I don't think it's the best because a lot of manufacturers will have, I mean, even Google, right? You could go on your Google Cloud platform and subscribe to a certain support level. And it comes with service level agreements of response time and, during what hours you can contact them and the extent to which they're willing to help you with. And they're effectively selling you that support package. It's personalized, it's tailored. What some manufacturers have done is to push a kind of charge concept, right? And a lot of automobile manufacturers do this. And the price ranges are huge. Some from a few tens of dollars, around $40 a month, to thousands of dollars a month for access to the technical documentations, the service bulletins, etc. Others would argue that that's actually training and that they would charge for the training, right? Where you take all of the documentation, you add, I guess, a personal layer on top of it saying, yes, this is all of the documentation that exists, but you, Mr. Client, are coming at us from a specific geographical location, and we've noticed that in your area, this is what is actually more of a need to know for your audience, and that's what will make you more productive.
Well, that seems like also marrying data, right? Like saying that that's a probability thing. And that really dovetails next into a question that was asked by one of our viewers, which I'm going to share with you now, which is, as a lawn tractor owner, so somebody who owns a lawn tractor is on the show today, I'm going to be much happier if you tell me how to get the mower started with no new parts or service needed. Well, yes, of course. You'd actually be happier if you never had to do that at all. By the way, when I've had the mower won't start, the issue has been battery related 100% of the time, usually the first time I mow in the spring, which begs the question is if your system were smart and you knew the probability that a lawnmower that wouldn't start, let's say in March, might have been because the lawnmowers have been sitting since August in a shed and the batteries have died. And that I'm in a cold climate where that, let's say, cold affects batteries. You could say it's probable that your battery's dead. It doesn't have to be, hey, we want to sell you a battery. We could just tell you the battery's dead. If you want to get a jump, right, from another machine instead of and charge up your battery that way, or if you want to find a different solution, you don't have to buy the part. But I think it's just trying to understand the user in their journey where they are and personalize the response so they get something valuable that's relevant to what their situation is.
Well, if you take that mower example, I really like it, and then combine it with your Dyson example. I'm assuming you're not cutting your grass during the winter months,
or inside.
Yeah. Well, if we had access, so if the OEM or the manufacturer of this lawnmower had access to sending you any kind of reminders or anything like that, imagine a letter that goes something like this: hey, it's September. You're probably getting ready to store your lawnmower. Yeah. Don't forget to top it up with gas, add some fuel stabilizer, part number XYZ,
right.
Do an oil change, part number XYZ, and disconnect your battery. By the way, if you don't already have a trickle charger to keep your battery fully charged over the winter's months, here's a trickle charger that we recommend, part number XYZ. See you in the springtime. Then springtime comes up and says, hey, hope you had a great winter. By the way, if your lawnmower doesn't start this spring, 100% of the time, users indicate that it's a battery that's not charged. Here's again a part number for a battery charger, and happy mowing. That's the kind of helpfulness.
If it were the right kind of product that was appropriate for a subscription, I could also see that being kind of and if you want us to remind you every year, let's say to, clean your gutters or whatever it is that the company's trying to remind you of, you could actually subscribe to that, right? And have it be a repeatable reminder, which could be a great way to enhance customer loyalty and satisfaction, and may lead to sales as well. Let me ask a follow-up question. You mentioned DITA earlier, and this is going to be in the weeds, so I don't expect you to necessarily have the perfect answer for this, but this particular viewer wants to know, do you see DITA moving towards parts information and PLM integration? I don't know if you've been paying attention to the DITA specification enough to comment on that. You have to tell me.
Let me just read it.
Yeah, it's just basically saying it was not really aimed at parts to begin with. I haven't seen any movement in that direction. Of course, I don't sit around watching the Oasis DITA communities activities all day long, so I can't say for certain. But I don't have any evidence to that. How about you?
I don't have evidence, but what I can say is that, you know, with the DITA framework, you do have that specifications.
Yeah, you can specialize.
And so, but you also have that specification. I guess you could say topic, right? So if there's a concept, task, and specification, usually the concept will tell you how something works. The task will, you know, be going about testing or replacing or something. And then the specification would be, you know, what is actually, stupid example, but for a 4-stroke engine has 4 strokes. One of them is combustion. So you could have a task of, one of them is compression. So you could have a task on measuring compression, and then the specification would be, say, 10-1. So if you could say, you know, on the lawnmower example as well, if you could just create a part number, this is not exactly the idea that I wanted to put forward at the beginning of this, but if you could use that specification tag at the very rough draft as your part numbers, that's something that could easily be included with various topics.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said except for the word easily. So
sorry,
only because that goes back to like how easier than what, as we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is a great idea. If there are people on the call that wanted to know a little bit more about this, how should they reach out to you? Is LinkedIn a really good channel for you, or?
I would say LinkedIn is absolutely the best. I presume that the follow-up email or the webinar recording will have all of that good access.
It will. And actually, in the attachment section right now, if you click in the attachment section, you could probably click right through to Michael's LinkedIn profile. And I encourage you to do so if this is something that you're interested in. I know he's trying to find out how to solve these problems and learn about new problems that you might have that we had not covered today. So if that's the case, definitely reach out to Michael. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I love this idea. I think we're onto something here. As more and more food for thought goes through here, if I noodle on anything interesting, I'll reach out to you, and we'll see if we can connect you up with somebody who might want to actually do this kind of stuff.
Well, thank you so much. And if I can say one maybe very last thing before we close off, in that example of the lawnmower, right, of suggesting fuel stabilizer, and don't forget to disconnect the battery, and maybe it ultimately leads to a sale in the end. But from a technical writing perspective, imagine the value of that article, right? Even if you don't sell a single part, if just in PR, just in karma, right? Just imagine the value of that article, that in springtime, nobody for that manufacturer forgot to unplug the battery, and everybody was able to cut their grass the first time. Maybe after 10 years, it just leads to a whole repurchase of the same lawnmower.
Yeah, I was going to say support center people would love that, because that meant that they didn't get a bunch of calls in February or March about, I can't start my lawnmower.
So it all comes back to, like, what is the value? You buy a lawnmower to cut the grass.
Exactly.
And so if you can make sure that your lawnmower is always cutting the grass when the neighbor is on, looking for parts and help desk and running out to buy a battery last minute because he waited too long.
I see the value there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for joining us today. I appreciate it. And I wish you much success and kind of drilling down into this idea and seeing what you can come up with. And thanks to our sponsor today, Zoomin Software. Today's show has been brought to you by Zoomin. Zoom is a delivery platform that can help you bring together structured and unstructured content all in one place so that you can build a knowledge center where customers can find all the information they need about the products that you have. I would even say that I would imagine you can do what Michael's been suggesting today and kind of put your sales connectors into your technical documentation using a product like Zoomin and push people right to a part where they might be able to to buy something from you and not just get the right answer, but also maybe even earn you a little revenue at the same time. If you're interested in learning more about that and getting a demo or having a private conversation with a Zoom In representative, you can do so by checking them out on the web at zoominsoftware.com. All right. 2 weeks from now, I'd like to invite you to our next episode of the Content Advantage Show, which takes place on March the 22nd. I'm going to be interviewing Ben Wolk, the Governance Awareness and Training Manager at the Rochester Institute of Technology. We're going to explore introverts and the challenges that they face in the workplace. Wolk, who's a self-proclaimed introverted leadership advocate, will share anecdotes and lessons he's learned from interviews during his podcast called Hope for the Introvert, a show about introverted leaders, their strengths, and how they apply them in the workplace and other parts of life. It'll be an interesting show, especially for a lot of the writers who sometimes are stereotypically categorized as introverts, and some writers who even identify as introverts. So if you are introvert or you know one, you're interested in them, definitely join us on this show, sponsored by Zoom In on March the 22nd. All right, you've been watching Context, Content, and Product Sales. Before you sign off, we'd appreciate it if you take a moment and let us know what you thought about today's show. You can use the Rate This tab located in your webinar viewing panel to give us a 1 through 5-star rating. Feel free to use the text box to provide a comment or suggest a topic for a future episode of the Content Advantage Talk Show. You've been watching the Content Advantage. Today's show has been recorded. Shortly after you sign off, you'll receive a link in an email that you can use to watch today's program as a recording. You can also share that and watch it on demand with others at any time. On behalf of myself, Scott Abel, the Content Wrangler, and our sponsor, Zoom In Software, I'd like to thank you for making time to watch our show today. We hope you'll join us for future episodes of the Content Advantage. Until then, be safe, be well, and keep doing great work. We'll see you again soon.
Ensure your customers find the answers they need with Zoom In. Bring together product content from all teams and sources to deliver a unified, personalized content experience. Check us out at www.zoominsoftware.com.
Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Hey,
Have a
Scott,
good day.
thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
so much. That was
Bye-bye.
fun.